Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're looking at a stack of economic analyses, market reports,
Mm.
and central bank data that attempt to explain what is honestly a massive, almost absurd contradiction in our modern financial reality.
Yeah, it really is.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive today is to decode what economists are calling the K-shaped economy. And we really need to figure out why the aggregate data says one thing while our wallets are just screaming something completely different.
Exactly.
Because I know I am not the only one experiencing a sort of financial whiplash lately.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
You scroll through the news, and it feels like you are getting dispatches from two entirely different planets. On one hand, you have headlines shouting about record-high stock markets, corporate profits soaring, GDP growing, and the economy adding just hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Right. The golden age narrative.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a golden age.
Yeah.
But then, literally in the same news feed, the next headline is about families struggling to afford basic groceries. Rent increases vastly outpacing wages, and everyday people carrying more than $1 trillion in collective credit card debt just to stay afloat.
Which is staggering.
It is. And the natural reaction is to think, well, how can both of these things be true at the exact same time?
Right, because it creates this profound sense of cognitive dissonance. When you look at the post-2020 recovery data, and really the macro trends of the last decade or so, you see this fracturing of the economic narrative. Historically, economists talked about recoveries in terms of shapes,
Like the V-shape, right?
Exactly. A V-shaped recovery where things crash and then bounce right back up, or a U-shape where we scrape the bottom for a while before recovering.
Right.
But in those models, the baseline expectation in modern macroeconomics was that economic cycles were a shared experience.
Okay, shared meaning everybody kind of goes through it together.
Yeah, exactly. During a boom, businesses expand, they hire more, wages generally go up across the board, and consumer confidence rises. And during a bust, businesses contract, layoffs happen, and everyone tightens their belts. It was cyclical, but it was collective.
Got it. So if I were to use an analogy, a traditional economic cycle is kind of like everyone riding on a giant escalator.
Oh, I like that.
Some people are standing on the higher steps, they have more wealth, better jobs, and some people are on the lower steps.
Right.
But the whole staircase, the entire machinery is moving up or down together.
Yeah.
So if it is going up, everyone is elevating. If it's going down, everyone is descending.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. The problem right now is that the escalator is broken.
Oh.
Yeah, the machinery of the shared cycle has fundamentally snapped. And that brings us to the visual of the letter K.
Okay, the K-shape.
Right. If you look at the data sets we are analyzing today, you start at a single point on the left of the K. That represents a starting line, like the onset of a major economic disruption or a big shift in monetary policy.
Right, like the start of the pandemic or something.
Exactly. From that single nexus, the lines diverge dramatically. The upper arm goes sharply up.
Okay.
That represents higher income earners, asset owners, large corporations. Their wealth, equity, and stability just accelerate at unprecedented rates.
Wow.
But from that exact same starting point, the lower arm goes sharply down, just flat lines. And that represents lower and middle income workers, renters, and people without significant investment portfolios.
So they're going down while the others go up.
Yeah. They are experiencing real wage stagnation or a genuine decline in their standard of living.
Which means we are looking at two entirely different economic realities happening simultaneously.
Yes.
Not just in the same country, but likely in the exact same city.
Oh, absolutely.
You could have two people living on the exact same street,
Yeah.
and one feels like the economy is absolutely thriving, while the other feels like they're just financially suffocating.
Yeah.
And neither of them is wrong, right?
Right.
Like they are both reporting accurately on their lived experience.
Yeah. They are. And that's why when we hear commentators arguing on television about whether the economy is quote unquote good or bad,
Right.
they are largely just shouting across the divide of the K. The person on the upward arm looks at their brokerage account and their home equity and thinks the pessimists are crazy.
Yeah, they're like, look at my 401k.
Exactly. And the person on the downward arm looks at the price of ground beef and their stagnant paycheck and thinks the optimists are delusional. The K-shape completely explains why those two sets of data no longer overlap.
Wow. Okay, so if we accept this premise that the escalator is broken and we have these two diverging tracks, what is the actual mechanical wedge driving them apart?
That is the big question.
Because looking at the data here, it seems to fundamentally come down to leverage. Specifically, the structural difference between how you make your money, so income versus assets.
Yes. The divergence really hinges on how capital functions in a modern financialized economy compared to human labor. The core dynamic is that the system heavily rewards wealth that grows autonomously, far more than it rewards physical or intellectual labor.
Right.
If we want to understand those diverging lines, we really have to look at the mechanics of wage growth versus asset appreciation.
Okay, wait. I have to challenge that a bit before we go further.
Sure.
Because I see headlines all the time about historic wage growth. Over the last couple of years, we saw retail workers and logistics workers negotiating much higher hourly rates, right?
Yes, we
We
did.
saw fast food workers getting $20 an hour in some states. So how can we confidently say labor is stagnating and dragging that bottom line down?
Well, that is a crucial distinction to make. What you are describing is nominal wage growth.
Nominal. Wow.
Yeah, the actual dollar amount on the paycheck going up. And yes, nominal wages did rise at a faster clip recently than they had in previous decades.
Right.
However, the metric that actually matters is real wage growth.
Which is adjusted for inflation.
Exactly. Wages adjusted for the cost of living. If your nominal wage goes up 4%, but the cost of housing, food, and energy goes up 6%,
Oh, right.
your real wage just declined by 2%.
Right. So even though the number is bigger, it buys less.
Exactly. You are working the exact same hours, maybe even getting a promotion, but your purchasing power is actively shrinking. Income is inherently linear. It is capped by the number of hours in a week and the market rate for your specific skills.
So labor is essentially a one-to-one exchange. I give you my time and energy. You give me a set amount of dollars.
Right.
It reminds me of carrying snow by the handful.
Okay, I like this.
You know, you only get what you can physically carry in that moment.
Okay.
And if you stop scooping, the accumulation stops immediately.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. Now compare that to assets.
Okay.
Stocks, real estate, ownership in a business. To use your metaphor, assets are like packing a snowball and rolling it down a long hill. Gravity and momentum do the work for you. Asset wealth grows through a totally different passive mechanism.
Right. You're not out there scooping anymore.
Exactly. It appreciates in value based on broader market dynamics, corporate stock buybacks, and overall demand, completely decoupled from your daily physical labor.
Wow.
While you are sleeping, your assets are compounding. And over the last 15 years, specifically due to central bank policies like sustained low interest rates and quantitative easing.
The cheap money era.
Exactly. We saw an era where money was incredibly cheap to borrow. That cheap money flooded into asset markets, inflating the value of stocks and real estate at a velocity that wages could never match.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's ground this compounding mechanic in some real numbers.
Let's do it.
Let's look at two hypothetical neighbors to see how this plays out over, say, a 5-year period.
Okay.
Neighbor A is a hardworking hospital administrator. They work 50 hours a week, and they rely entirely on their salary. Maybe they get a 3% raise every year.
A standard middle-class comparison.
Right. Now, neighbor B has a similar job, same salary, but they bought a house early on, and they have a robust stock portfolio, maybe an index fund, tracking the S&P 500.
Okay.
So over a multi-year period, the S&P 500 might have a year where it returns 20% or 24%.
Mm-hmm.
Real estate values in their neighborhood surge by 15%. Neighbor B's wealth compounds dramatically. They suddenly have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in new net worth, generated entirely passively.
Right.
Meanwhile, neighbor A's, who are just as hard,
If not harder.
yeah, exactly, they capture absolutely none of that macroeconomic growth. Neighbor A's linear labor simply cannot compete with neighbor B's compounding capital.
It just can't.
The gap between them widens massively, not because neighbor A made a terrible financial mistake, but because they're relying purely on labor in a system optimized for capital.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we look at the demographic data in our sources, this dynamic explains why the K-shape is so structurally stubborn.
What do you mean by stubborn?
It disproportionately impacts younger generations who entered the workforce later.
Right.
They simply haven't had the time or the surplus income to acquire capital yet. It heavily impacts people from lower income backgrounds who don't have generational wealth to jumpstart an investment portfolio.
Let's start at zero.
Exactly. The system is designed such that capital accelerates faster than wages. If you are locked out of asset ownership because 100% of your wages go to basic survival,
Which is the case for so many people right now.
it is, then you are structurally pinned to the downward arm of the K.
Man, it really redefines the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
It really does.
You know, you can pull on those boots all day long, but if the primary engine of wealth generation is passive asset growth and your entire paycheck is consumed by rent and groceries, you never even get the chance to build a snowball.
Which naturally leads us to examine the forces acting on that paycheck. We have established how assets launch the top tier upward. But if someone's wages are just flat or growing slightly, why does it feel like they are actively drowning? Stagnant just means flat. What is the mechanism that is actively pulling the floor out from under the lower arm of the K?
Well, looking at the data here, it's the mechanics of inflation.
Yes.
But wait, I have to challenge the premise of the sources on this point, too.
Okay, go for it.
Because I hear analysts call inflation a regressive tax, meaning it hurts the poor more than the rich.
Mm-hmm.
But inflation is just a math equation. It's a flat percentage reported across the board. If the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, goes up by 8%, the cost of a gallon of milk goes up 8% for the hedge fund manager and 8% for the janitor.
Right.
The math is identical.
Yeah.
So how can a single number structurally punish one group more than the other?
The math of the price increase is identical, but the mathematics of the household budget are entirely different.
Oh, okay.
It comes down to a concept called the marginal propensity to consume.
The marginal propensity to consume.
Exactly. And specifically, the percentage of a household's income that is allocated to non-negotiable essentials.
The stuff you just have to buy to live.
Right. The CPI tracks a basket of goods, shelter, food, energy, transportation. Let's look at how that basket hits different income brackets.
Okay, let's take a high-income household on the upward arm of the K.
Okay.
If their weekly grocery bill spikes by 10% or their property taxes jump, it is certainly annoying.
Sure.
But functionally, it just gets absorbed into the discretionary buffer of their budget.
Yeah.
It might mean they direct a few $100s less into their savings account that month, but it doesn't fundamentally alter their lifestyle.
Exactly. The key is that essential goods make up a relatively small percentage of their total income.
Oh.
Maybe 20% or 30% of their take-home pay goes to fix survival costs.
Right.
But now apply that exact same 10% price increase to a household on the downward arm.
The janitor in our example.
Right. For a lower income earner, a massive chunk of their monthly income, sometimes 70% or 80%, is already locked into essential goods. There is zero slack in the budget.
Oh, wow. So for them, a 10% increase in food and rent isn't an annoyance. It consumes the entirety of their remaining margin.
It completely wipes them out.
It forces impossible choices. Do we buy fresh produce or do we pay the heating bill?
Right.
Do we delay a car repair to make rent? The identical percentage increase acts as a wrecking ball to one budget while barely denting the other.
Furthermore, economists look at something called the substitution effect.
What's that?
When beef gets too expensive, the higher income family might substitute it by buying chicken.
Right, they just step down one level of luxury.
Exactly. But what does the lower income family substitute? They were already buying the cheapest generic staples.
There's nowhere else to go.
There is no lower rung on the ladder to step down to. They simply have to consume less food or put the deficit on a high-interest credit card.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this divide, are the economists and the regular people even looking at the same reality? Because this brings up a massive point of confusion I see in economic reporting.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
When I watch the financial news and the anchors announce that inflation has cooled down to 3%, they treat it like a victory lap.
Oh, they certainly do.
Right. The Federal Reserve pats itself on the back. But if I talk to someone dealing with that tight budget, they're furious because they go to the store and prices haven't dropped at all. Are the economists and the public just using the word inflation to mean two different things?
Essentially, yes. This is a vital mechanical distinction. Disinflation versus deflation.
Okay, lay that out for us.
When economists celebrate inflation falling from 9% to 3%, they are celebrating disinflation.
Disinflation.
Yes. It means prices are still rising, just at a slower speed.
Yep.
But the general public often conflates lower inflation with deflation, which would mean prices actually dropping back to where they were 3 years ago. Ah, I see. So when the headline says inflation is cooling, the family agonizing over the electric bill looks at their statement and says, no, it isn't. My bill is higher than ever.
Exactly. The damage from that initial 9% spike didn't magically disappear.
Right.
It was permanently baked into the baseline cost of living.
Wow.
A 3% inflation rate today is compounding on top of the massive price hikes from previous years. The economists are looking at the rate of change and declaring victory, while the worker is looking at the cumulative price level and feeling completely crushed.
It is so wild when you put it like that. The macro data aggregates the national economy and determines that the system as a whole has not collapsed. But an average can hide an immense amount of localized suffering.
It hides almost all of it, honestly.
Which brings us to perhaps the most confounding paradox in this entire data set. If the lower arm of the K is struggling so profoundly just to buy essential groceries,
Right.
why does the Commerce Department keep releasing reports saying consumer spending remains incredibly robust?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. This is the data point that absolutely drives people crazy. Spending is traditionally viewed as the ultimate vital sign of a healthy economy.
Exactly.
The logic goes, if people are spending money, they must feel confident and financially secure.
That's the textbook assumption, yeah.
So if half the country is financially drowning and taking on credit card debt just to buy eggs, how can national spending data be so strong?
It comes down to how aggregate data masks underlying distributions. The spending data is highly misleading because it measures total dollars spent, not the number of people spending them.
Oh, wait. Total dollars, not total people.
What's fascinating here is that in a highly unequal K-shaped economy, total consumption numbers can look fantastic, but they are being driven disproportionately by the top quintile of earners.
The Pareto principle in action.
Exactly.
A small percentage of the population is driving the vast majority of the discretionary spending. Let's go back to our neighbor B, the one whose stock portfolio just jumped 24%.
Right, the guy with the assets.
They're experiencing what economists call the wealth effect. Because their net worth just skyrocketed on paper, they feel incredibly flush with cash, even if they haven't sold the stocks.
The wealth effect is a very powerful psychological driver. When people feel richer due to asset appreciation, their propensity to consume luxury goods and services just spikes.
So Neighbor B books a premium vacation, remodels their kitchen, and starts eating out at high-end restaurants 3 nights a week.
Yeah.
They were injecting massive amounts of capital into the service and retail sectors. And because they have so much disposable income, their single luxury spending spree easily outweighs the forced cutbacks of 5 or 6 families on the downward arm of the K.
The data bears this out perfectly. The wealthy are spending confidently, and when the Federal Reserve or the Commerce Department tallies up all the receipts at the macro level, the total pile of money spent is larger than the previous quarter.
So the headline reads, consumers remain resilient.
Yes. But applying the word resilient to the entire population is a massive analytical flaw.
It honestly feels a bit insulting to the people on the bottom arm.
It really does.
Lower and middle-income households are not demonstrating resilience by casually participating in the economy. They are fiercely defending their survival.
Exactly.
They are aggressively slashing discretionary spending, canceling streaming services, buying clothes at thrift stores, never eating out. They are doing all of this just to maintain their ability to buy the shelter and food that just spiked in price.
And we also have to look at the composition of that spending.
What do you mean?
The aggregate data shows spending is up, but it rarely highlights how that spending is financed at the bottom. The top arm of the K is spending cash generated by asset yields or high salaries.
Right.
The bottom arm is increasingly maintaining their baseline consumption by exhausting their savings and racking up high-interest credit card debt.
Wow.
The macro data just registers a transaction. It doesn't differentiate between a discretionary cash purchase and a desperation credit card swipe.
Man, it is a statistical mirage. The national economy looks strong on paper, specifically because the rich are spending their newly minted compounding asset wealth.
Yes.
That top-heavy luxury consumption casts a massive shadow over the aggregate data, completely hiding the fact that a huge portion of the population is quietly executing a brutal survival budget.
Exactly. And when you lay out the mechanics like this, the leverage of assets, the regressive math of inflation, the masking effect of aggregate spending,
Right.
it paints a very stark picture of structural divergence.
Oh.
But the most compelling aspect of the sources we are reviewing today isn't just the cold, hard mathematics of the macroeconomy.
Right, it's not just spreadsheets.
No, it is the behavioral economics. It is the psychological reality of living inside this statistical contradiction.
I am really glad we are pivoting to this because you cannot separate the economic data from the human toll.
You really can't.
Living on the downward arm of the K,
Hmm.
while the entire media ecosystem and political apparatus tells you the economy is doing wonderfully, creates a deeply isolating psychological burden.
It does.
We are social creatures. We naturally look to our environment and to authority figures to validate our understanding of the world.
Yes, and when the macro narrative completely contradicts the micro reality of your kitchen table, it generates immense stress. It is honestly a form of structural gaslighting.
Structural gaslighting. That is exactly what it feels like. Think about the emotional sequence here. You are working 50 hours a week. You are standing in the aisle at the grocery store, staring at the price of basic staples, doing mental math to ensure your debit card won't decline.
Yeah, we've all been there, or know someone who is right now.
You feel a knot of anxiety in your stomach. Then you go home, turn on the evening news, and there is a panel of experts with big smiles discussing a booming GDP, record low unemployment, and a historic bull market.
Right.
The immediate internal reaction for most people isn't to think, aggregate spending data must be skewed by asset inflation at the top quintile.
No, nobody thinks that.
Right. The immediate human reaction is it just me? Am I failing?
Exactly. People naturally internalize structural failures as personal failures.
Wow.
If the news anchors and the politicians are declaring that the economy is thriving and everyone else is supposedly doing great, the person struggling to pay rent assumes they must have made terrible life choices.
Right. They think, I didn't work hard enough, I didn't save enough.
They assume they aren't smart enough. The narrative of the booming economy actually weaponizes their own struggles against them.
And that is exactly why understanding the mechanics of the K-shaped economy is so crucial. It isn't just an academic exercise for economists. It is a tool for psychological empowerment.
It really is.
It provides a data-supported, mathematically sound explanation that validates what everyday people are feeling. It says, no, you aren't crazy. You aren't necessarily doing anything wrong. You are just caught on the downward track of a massive structural divergence.
It acts as a diagnosis.
A diagnosis.
Yeah, think about it like in medicine. If a patient feels terrible, but all the superficial tests come back normal and the doctors tell them they are perfectly healthy, the patient starts to question their own sanity.
Oh, right, because they still feel awful.
Exactly. The physical pain is compounded by the psychological torment of being disbelieved.
Right.
But when a specialist finally looks at a deeper, more specific scan and says, here is the exact mechanism causing your pain. You have this specific condition.
It's a huge relief.
There is an immediate wave of relief. The condition itself might still be painful to endure, but it is no longer a mystery, and crucially, it is no longer the patient's fault.
Naming the K-shape provides that exact same relief. And let's be clear. Knowing the term marginal propensity to consume doesn't magically pay your electric bill next month.
Right. No.
Understanding asset compounding doesn't retroactively fund a 401k, but it lifts a massive burden of shame. A person could look at their tight budget and say, this is incredibly hard right now because the system is structurally optimized to reward capital over labor, and inflation is heavily regressive.
Exactly.
It is hard because of the math, not because I am a failure. That shift in perspective restores dignity.
It does. It allows individuals to direct their frustration outward toward the structural mechanics and policy decisions that shape the economy, rather than turning that frustration inward on themselves or their families.
This is so important for mental health right now.
Absolutely. It fosters a much healthier, more accurate understanding of their place within the broader system.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together because we have covered some incredibly dense structural mechanics today.
We really have.
We started with the core mystery of the contradictory headlines, and we found the answer in the shattered escalator of the K-shaped economy. We explored how the compounding momentum of assets acts like a snowball, rapidly outpacing the linear, handful-by-handful reality of wage labor.
Right.
We challenged the idea that inflation is a flat experience, breaking down how identical percentage increases act as a regressive wrecking ball to lower-income budgets. We dismantled a mirage of aggregate spending data, showing how the luxury consumption of the top quintile masks the debt-fueled survival spending of the bottom. And finally, we discussed the psychological necessity of diagnosing the K to relieve the burden of internalized shame.
It is a comprehensive framework that demands we look past the headlines. If I can offer a final point of synthesis for anyone listening who has been feeling that intense financial squeeze.
Please do.
Your personal financial experience is a statistically valid data point.
Oh, I love that.
The national aggregate data is an average, and averages do not pay your grocery bills. The structural friction you are feeling is real, it is documented, and it is built into the current mechanics of the system. Do not let the data from the upward arm of the K dictate the reality of your own life.
I think we have really equipped our listeners with the analytical tools to see through the noise of mainstream economic reporting today. But as with all of our deep dives, analyzing the data usually just unearths a larger, more complex puzzle.
It certainly does. We have diagnosed the mechanical wedge driving these two realities apart. But the trajectory of that divergence points toward a deeply concerning horizon.
Where is it heading?
Well, this raises an important question, one that wasn't explicitly modeled in our macroeconomic sources today, but is the undeniable logical conclusion of everything we've just unpacked.
Okay.
If these two arms of the K continue to accelerate away from each other, if they keep existing in completely different economic realities, dealing with different struggles, and literally experiencing a different cost of living, what happens to the social fabric when those two groups can no longer perceive or understand each other's reality at all?
Wow.
When the policymakers, the central bankers, and the media figures reporting the news are almost exclusively stationed on the upward arm, totally insulated from the daily crisis of the downward arm, how long can a society function? What happens to the legitimacy of a system when it is fundamentally fractured into two incompatible realities?
That is a staggering thought to end on. Because eventually, unresolved economic mechanics always translate into societal consequences. Well, thank you all for coming along on this deep dive with us today. We hope it brought you some clarity, a bit of psychological relief, and a sharper lens for viewing the world around us. Take care of yourselves, and we will talk to you next time.